just don't want to show you're smart. You need to communicate to the reader. But that's not the purpose of a dissertation chapter, it's to show off. And at best, maybe 3 people ever read it. If you assume that all of your committee read your dissertation, which isn't always a likely assumption. It's not uncommon to fail. I remember when I was on internship, this woman had catered her dissertation defense and brought in some food, and people started nibbling, but she said, "Oh wait, let's wait till we're done." And then she failed the dissertation. They just carted the food away with I don't know where it went, but it certainly wasn't served. Other people passed their dissertation, but contingent on changes that are so extensive they never make them. I was given the advice not to do the idea that I was most excited about, because I'd be so burned out by the process of writing a dissertation that I'd give up on it. So I was supposed to pick my second best idea, and it's to say my best idea for afterwards. Often mostly people don't write the papers from the dissertations until the dissertation's been approved. At some universities, there used to be a rule you could not submit a paper based on your dissertation, because that would undermine the authority of your committee. So they didn't want you to be able to say, "I'm sorry, it just got accepted in science, so it must be okay." So they didn't want you to be able to counter your advisor telling you to make changes, so you weren't allowed to submit it. And of course, there are lots of great papers that could have been written that are just on a shelf somewhere. But I think that in fairness, the Dutch PhD students, they bear a different kind of responsibility. Your advisor depends on you doing well in your dissertation and pressures you in ways that Americans don't. And in many respects, the Dutch research engine, which is impressive, depends on the work of the PhD students, and is real concern about that your papers be of appropriate impact. And I understand in some departments there are formulas that you have to add up in terms of the impact factor of the journals that you publish in. And in my other life, I'm an activist against that system and for open access. But right now we're stuck with it. And I think in the near future, but not for a long time, we'll be stuck with it. So it's a lot of pressure. But the good thing is that having to write papers and publish them and get feedback from multiple people, that allows you to set goals in a different way. And I think one of the things that's so disabling, so debilitating for American PhD students is they work so hard for so long with no feedback. And there are no goalposts. It's like going on a long trip and all the roadmap, all the signs have been gone. And you have no idea where you're going or how long you'll be traveling. And I think that you can use the paper structure to set small attainable goals. And one of the themes in my talk today about reducing stress is to make sure that you have things in sight and that you pass them and can feel good about it. Perfection is the enemy of done. And what that means is I think that one form of maladaptive thinking is to think that your work has to be really great. And that the assumption is that it just pours out of you, and the process of writing a dissertation, somehow the dissertation is in you, and you've got to get it out. And I'm going to propose a different kind of model, is that a lot of your work is done confronting the imperfection of what you write and adapting to it. And I have what I call the shitty first draft strategy, which we'll talk about. And everybody wants a perfect dissertation article, but no one ever gets one. Is this a familiar concept? Mm-hmm. I work with Dutch, I have to say. By the way, people say that I often start my talks trashing the Dutch, end up doing more of a job on the Americans, so be patient. I'll get to that. But I do think there's sometimes a cultural conflict that starts out in, maybe in junior high school, where you learn to just do good enough. And I think the problem with it when you're working on something like a dissertation is you end up not really liking what you're doing, and you send off stuff and you get revised and resubmit, or you get outright rejection, and you get demoralized and you hate what you're doing. And I think that you have to set out with the idea that you're better off if you can take some pride in what you're doing and make the extra effort. It gets a lot less frustrating. And basically it's easy to keep going. I tell people don't marry their dissertation papers, but they should at least be able to date them. You know, you have to, when you get revised and resubmit, and you have to make major revisions, you don't want to get too committed to them. You may even have to kill them when they get rejected altogether. And you got to be able to do that without any bad feelings about it. So, but you do have to have, I think, some positive emotion about it that really carries you when things get bad. Know yourself. If you don't know yourself, get to know yourself while you're working on your dissertation. Figure out what the most self-defeating thing about you and try to work around it. Figure out what are your demons, or who are your demons, the habits that are enemies of success for you. And I think one of the defense against them is to strongly develop routines. I advocate people writing every day. And you commit yourself to writing 200 words. And that may sound like a lot, but if you set out committed to do that, you find it's a lot easier than you think. And we'll come back to that. And to do it at a set time. I think part of learning about yourself is learning when you should best write. Some of us are early morning people, and some of us just can't get the brain cells working until 3 cups of coffee and 11 o'clock. And there's some people that are strange. I don't know how they do it. I think the biology is different than mine, but they go to work after dinner, and they work into the early morning hours. And I've collaborated with people like that, and it's very odd. But I really think that there's something about your chronobiology that's set, and know when your alertness comes and when it goes. I write with a voice recognition software, and I would get carpal tunnel syndrome if I had to type everything that I write. And so I speak into the computer, and the idea is that I avoid any aspiration to perfection. I just want to get it out. And the idea is not to write well, it's to rewrite well. And so that I can write, I think, pretty fluidly. And I probably do most days anywhere from 500 to 2,000 words. And when I'm blogging, I sometimes keep track of that, and I try to get a 3,500 word blog done in 2 days. So it doesn't interfere with the rest of my life. And you can learn to do that. But the emphasis has got to be on imperfection, that you cherish your imperfection in what you're writing, and that you can confront it and change it. And if it has to roll out perfect, then it won't roll out. I practice what's called structured procrastination. All of us would like to put off things and avoid. And I know that I'm very distractible, and I'll do that. Structured procrastination involves having a list of things that you've got to work on, and if you don't work on the thing that's most important, you work on the second most important. You go down the list. And so that when you're working on your writing, if it slows down, then you may go ahead and go to your references, or if you're stuck on your introduction, jump to your method section. Almost always you can write a method section of your paper. It takes a lot less thought. The idea that you start at the beginning and go to the end, for me, that's not adaptive. Start writing early in your projects. How many people use Google Scholar? Yeah, that's good. I think that's one of the best search engines right now, because you get stuff early, and you can be very lazy about how you put stuff in. If you don't like it, you stop the alert, start another one. And I find it's crucial to keep up on the literature. So when you start your project, set up some alerts, and so twice a week you get notified. And once you start publishing papers yourself, it starts finding those papers and starts giving you alerts based on those papers. Binge writing does not work for most people. You exhaust yourself. I know a lot of people who write all the time, and very few of them can write more than 3 hours a day. They can find other things to do related to their writing, but it's pretty tough to keep up. And I think that you can get it down to even less than that, particularly if you learn to be efficient. Overcome avoidance behavior, okay. Button the chair technique. Sometimes I know what I'll do to try to undo myself. I'll wander around and find things to do. I'll listen to music or get up, get a cup of espresso. So button the chair technique is you go to the bathroom, you get your espresso, you get all those things out of the way, and then you don't have to write, but you can't get out of the chair or do anything else for a half hour, 45 minutes. And so you can't, like a toothpaste tube, squeeze the writing out of you, but you can remove the distractions of being able to do other things, and it tends to come. So you basically control yourself by controlling your environment. And the famous author in Tyler says, if I waited till I felt like writing, I'd never write at all. I think most able writers, active writers, give up on the idea that there's a special moment in which they write. They just write. Start writing no matter what. The water does not flow until the faucet's turned on. Louis D'Amour wrote, I think, 70 novels. And he just wrote. And some of it was crap. But he could only appreciate that it was crap when he saw it in front of him. Sleep deprivation, avoid it. It's really an enemy. It decreases the quality and accuracy of your work. It reduces your ability to think and judge clearly. It reduces your ability to make decisions. It diminishes your memory. And as little as an hour and a half of sleep deprivation for one night can drop your alertness by 32%. Now, I know a lot of people who consider insomnia their co-author. And what they do is they get really psyched up about what they're working on. And traveling internationally a lot, I get a lot of jet lag, and I guess jet lag is my co-author. And it basically involves you wake up at 3 a.m. and you're a little bit detached from your work. Certainly I would never make the mistake to jump out of bed and start typing, but you start thinking about your work, a little bit of detachment. And you often get amazing insights. And you know, the ancient Greeks were convinced that there were gods that put stuff in your head, the muses, because they were so impressed by what would come into people's heads spontaneously in the night like that. And I found just don't interfere with it, but do sort of make mental notes. I tried keeping a tape recorder when I was working on one project next to the bed, and I'd click it on, but somehow that would break the spell of whatever was going on. My muse, whoever she was or he was, would go away, and I'd be left with just a running tape recorder. Nonsense. But I think that you need time to write, but you need time away from your writing. And I think that in a really exciting project, you need to even restrain yourself and sometimes stop writing when you've got something that you're all ready to put down, and just go with it the next day. It'll carry you the next day. So think about, it's a marathon. It's not. It's, you know, one paper is long enough, but you've got to do 3, 5 papers, and you've got to keep yourself in shape, and you've got to not wear yourself out. You don't want to exert yourself as if it's just a short sprint, and constantly look at ways in which you could become more effective. Sometimes, like controlled drinking, some people have to control Twitter and email access while they're writing, because otherwise it becomes a distraction. So if it's depending on your personality, you might want to do those things before and get them out of the way, because otherwise you can't resist going to email when you're writing in the morning. But some people do better if they put it off, and that becomes a reward. Taking a break is working. Here's Gertrude Stein. It takes a lot of time to be a genius. You have to sit around so much doing nothing, really doing nothing. And I think she got it, that a lot of the most efficient processing is on the edge of your consciousness. So you basically load up things. I think of myself like a computer sometime. I load up what I'm working on, and it's like the little light going on in my computer, You know, there's some processing going on, but I'm off doing something else. And very often now, I don't know how to really use an iPad to write, but I'll send the stuff to my iPad and I'll take it to a cafe and just read what I've been writing without the ability to change it. And it can be painful sometimes. Oh, you just really want to change that. Some of it just sound like, you know, fingernails on the wall. It's so horrible, but you're motivated, and when you're detached by not being able to write. B, a lot of the thesis work gets done in the bed, in the bath, or the shower, or in bars, and you got to program that time in. Again, that I think the enemy of getting creative thought is binging, because you don't allow that. Relationships, use peer support. There are a lot of people in the States go on the web now and they buddy up with someone they really don't know, except they're both at the same stage of their dissertation. They get these intense relationships going, which they may never meet each other, but they can kind of, with a little bit of detachment, offer support in a way that a partner can't necessarily do, because they're invested in you doing well. There's social media that people do. There are groups on the web that meet. There's something called Prof Hacker, where a lot of people go. And then there's PhD Comics. I highly recommend that. You see, yeah, I get some great material for my writing course from PhD Comics. I think, gee, I wonder, but I'd like to be reassured that those people actually work on the PhDs too, and they're not a bunch of American ABDs, you know? Most dissertation students could benefit from having a wife. That's what one of the women in my class said back when I was working on mine. It was not the idea that, but they need somebody who was putting the PhD students' needs first, and within reason, and you know, covering for them. But you've got to protect your relationships. It can be very difficult for relationships and partners. Particularly if your partner's never worked on a dissertation, the process can be very difficult to understand. And here's this, you know, someone's partner says, "You're staring out the window again, the writer should be pounding the keyboard." Wrong. Typers pound keyboards. Writers stare out windows. And they just don't get it. And they'll say, "What are you doing?" "I'm working on my dissertation." "You've been staring out into the garden for 2 hours, and I really need help around here." "Yeah, but I'm getting somewhere." It's hard if you just don't grasp it, you know, if you haven't been there. Often better to talk to your dog about than your partner. Because, you know, you have reasonable expectations when you talk to your dog. You know, they pick up on the tone, and they can get excited with you, and they don't try to understand. Sometimes spouses think that you need them to understand, or you feel they need to understand. They shouldn't just be excited and positive. You're going to really understand the theory I'm working on. Now, go to a dog. It gets much clearer, the boundaries. It's better for your relationship, I think, if you talk to your dog. Don't let partners set deadlines. I think it's hard not to do that sometimes, but I'm sure you've got colleagues whose partner says, "I want to go to Barcelona, and I don't want you to be burdened by working on your dissertation. Make sure you get your paper out the door before we go to Barcelona." And I think people need to trust each other. They're not delaying the writing of their paper just to be frustrating, and it doesn't help to know that they're frustrating you. But it's easy in the heat of working on the dissertation to forget that thing. And to instead, the partner takes it personal. "You're just holding it up so make me miserable. You're just holding up so that you won't have to pay attention to me when we go to Barcelona." No, don't give yourself too much credit. And don't set unrealistic deadlines just to placate your partner. I think there's a point where people have to detach a little bit when they're working on their dissertation. Don't make sacrifices you resent later. Don't make promises that you resent later. Sometimes just things go slower than you'd like, and it doesn't help to try to speed up for external reasons, namely to avoid the wrath of a partner. And I think that people often they can get clumsy and even mean to each other because they start feeling it's more important to them for the partner to get their dissertation done than it is the partner. Trust me, it's important for a PhD student to get done, and hopefully partners can trust in that, even if they're frustrated and they see the distracting things that people do. And sometimes being distracted and wasted time is part of the process, and it's not personal. Indulge, tolerate each other's eccentricities. I like this line from Eleanor Roosevelt. I'm doing the best I can at the moment, however, it's not my best moment. So it's just saying, back off. It's a way of kind of asking for slack nicely. And apologize. Dutch seem very polite, nice people, but they don't seem to apologize a lot. And I think there's some times when you've been an ass because you're working on your dissertation. You got really worked up, and sometimes it doesn't undo it, but it makes it a little bit easier to bear if you say, I'm sorry, I was an ass. I learned this from a flight attendant. You're flying in a plane, they get out there and they demonstrate something. I've never seen it actually happen. Flown, hundreds of thousands of miles, and we've never had decompression. They feel it's very important for you to know what to do. And you get this mask that's going to come down. They always tell you it's not going to inflate, it's still working. But the other thing they tell you is make sure yours is adjusted before you try to take care of anybody else. And I think with the PhD thesis, and in the midst of all the stress, I think the PhD student has to focus on getting things done and worry less about the partner. Deal with that later. Similarly, the partner's got to be able to just let it go and realize that for right now, the PhD student partner is not as fun to be with, is not as available, but it shall pass. And it won't pass any quicker if you get all worked up. So it packs a little bit of detachment. And sometimes couples need to explicitly negotiate that the partner will go out on certain nights without the PhD student, because the PhD student's going to be no fun and probably needs a little bit of time for themselves too. And that's the other thing that gets people lose sight of. Maybe you can tell I used to be a couples therapist. But one of the things is that people say your dissertation is depriving me of you, and I want that time back. I want time with you. But there's only so much of the PhD student to go around, and so they have some time for their partner, they have time for the dissertation, they still need time for themselves. And sometimes partners can forget that, and they treat it almost like they get jealous of the dissertation and all the attention it's getting. And they start demanding more time, and they forget that the PhD student needs time. Needs to do things that probably, just like when they're not working on the PhD, they need time that doesn't involve the partner. And they need time that doesn't involve the dissertation. Write every day. Writing daily is hard. It's not like you're building up muscles, but you're getting all of the resistance to writing out of the way. And I've known some pretty dysfunctional writers, and they may not shower or shave for a couple days, but they write every day. And they just work it into their routine, and it's just reflexive. I know when I was working on my dissertation, we missed the plane, and so I just dropped down in the waiting area and started typing, and my partner was furious because how could I do that? What else could I do? I just gotta write. It was so reflexive, and I think that it's a mistake to put things aside for too long. You've got to go back to them when they're fresh. And I know Americans don't take many vacations, particularly when they're working on their PhD. But I think one of the advantages of not taking a lot of vacation is you want to stay fresh on it. You want to stay up on it. I actually had some cartoons I didn't bring that there was some Americans talking about their dissertations. They're saying, I'll be so glad to go away on vacation next week. I can get some work done on my dissertation. That's so sick by Dutch standards, I guess. You wouldn't go on your vacation working at the station? Anybody? No. See, that's the time to work at the station. Okay. I think that we saw that slide. If you think about writing 200 words, and I realize that a difference between a Dutch PhD student and an American PhD student is Americans think about working on their PhD as part of their career, where it's more explicitly a job in the Netherlands, and so you work set hours. And so you can't tell a Dutch person to write 7 days a week every day, so you say 5 days a week. But in the United States, people work every day. And the idea is if you did, it would be 6,000 words a month. Now, I don't know what fields you're in, but in a lot of fields, 27 to 3,500 words is a paper. So you could be done in just a couple months if you write every day. Again, you got to know yourself. Some people need to be only working on one paper at a time, and I personally couldn't do that. I'm too distractible. And so I work on a number of papers, and I think about how they're related. Often I work on my introduction. If I get stuck, I'll jump to the discussion section, because I've got a clear sense of the structure of what I'm writing, and that as I understand the scientific paper, that in this introduction is sort of like a funnel. You start off broadly, you know, I'm studying blah, 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 the sex life of starfish or whatever, and you get down more narrow. There are certain starfish that only reproduce in the dead of winter, and I'm wondering why. So you start off broadly down a narrow question. Well, when you think about discussion, you're basically in between the introduction and the discussion. There was some action where you did some studying, maybe you made some observations, or you manipulated things, and then you start out with the discussion. I started out with the research question, blah, 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 and what I found was blah, blah, blah. I was surprised, or I wasn't surprised. It's consistent, or it's not consistent with the literature. So it's actually a very nice aesthetics from the introduction, narrowing down, and discussion coming out from the results. And if you're aware of that, then you write that way. Or if you get stuck right in the introduction and the discussion section, then you work on the methods, because you can always describe your methods. So the thing is, just always have something to write. And don't get caught up in it just sort of flowing out, some primitive model of dissertations where it just flows out complete. You just got to keep it coming. It's much more interactive. So again, you don't get burned out if you write 200 words a day. I think it protects you from burnout. So what you do is you actually keep track of your writing, and when you get 200, you can stop. If you write 500, you turn the clock back. You still have to start and do 200. There's no saving up words and saying, I'm 3 months ahead. No, at best, you're ahead. Congratulations, but it gets set back the next day. And it really does come easy. You can be revisions. It can be references. Allow yourself a little leeway. Allow yourself a little cheating. That way you can stay in the game. Now you can go on the web, and there's some really crazed Americans who say they can write 1,500 words a day. And maybe, but they should be medicated, I think. You know, it could be hypomania or something. But the problem with setting a goal of 1,500 words a day is there will be some days in which you don't write 1,500, and you want to protect yourself from that failure experience. So the idea is there's some goal structuring going on. Think small and meetable goals, and you're more likely to preserve your morale and your momentum than if you set big goals and fail. Can be anything, one big idea, one quote. See, it adds up. Okay, the shitty draft or the zero draft. I know a lot of people getting into this. It seems to be real hot on the web. I discovered it a few years ago. And it's a whole different philosophy of writing, is that you cherish imperfection. And in fact, when you're doing your shitty first draft, you may start with, I have no idea what I'm going to say about, and you say whatever you're writing about. And it's surprising, it seems like a cheap trick, but it sometimes gets you going enough to be able to clip off the I have no idea and then keep going. If you can't write your first sentence, write a shitty first sentence that you know is going to be discarded, just keep going. But don't get attached to your writing. When I teach scientific writing here at COYNE sometime, and what I often do is I have people write 250 words and then email it to a buddy in the class. And the buddy's job is to cut 50 words. And the notion is that writing always benefits from cutting words. Mark Twain says, good writing is knowing what words to cut. But it's much easier to practice on that kind of surgery if you're cutting somebody else rather than yourself. Ouch, ooh, I'm attached to that. And I think that good writers learned to have that kind of detachment. That once it's out there on the page, they can let it go if it doesn't fit. And they can dispassionately cut without saying ouch. So one well-developed version of the zero draft you can find in the book Writing with Style. What you do is you look at your notes ahead of time, and you may review them, you may review what you wrote yesterday, and then you open a file and you start fresh. And you just go with it, and then only afterwards do you integrate that back in. It's a great it's a side benefit is most of you in this room are not native English speakers, and most of you find stuff on the web that's said better than you can say it. And the danger is when you cut and paste out of that inadvertently you lose attributions. And if you're doing this technique, then you've got one step removed from it. So you're unlikely to, I don't think people really have photographic memories where it just flows out. And I think it's more into your own words, and there's an added advantage to that. Begin anywhere, beginning will change later. And again, I had to really work at this. As they say in the States, I'm kind of learning different. I'm kind of dyslexic, and I sometimes would struggle to try to get it just right. And it was liberating to realize it doesn't have to be, it won't be, just let it go. And you can correct it after. So the thing is, don't try to perfect your writing, perfect your rewriting. And there's some rules. There's Judith Swan has written some stuff on the science of science writing, and she emphasizes that well-formed, persuasive American English sentences tend to take a particular form, and they tend to have the subject as early in the sentence as possible, and have as little between the subject and the verb. And that's like the opposite of German. We have the verb at the end of the sentence. And but if you're not a native speaker, or especially if you're a German speaker, and try to follow that rule, you get really inhibited. So let it come out the way it's going to come out, and then revise afterwards. You'll learn quicker. It's like trying to speak a foreign language and trying to force yourself into thinking in that language before you're ready to. Okay, but the thing is to keep moving, and even babble will stop turning into stuff. There's no need to fear that the thesis will go on forever. You can always continue to make edits and revisions, revised. But at some point you run into a deadline, you get exhausted, or you get satisfied. And maybe with experience and luck that you'll get satisfied before you get exhausted. And maybe not your first paper, but your second one. So the good thing about a dissertation is that all's well that ends, period, at some point. It's not all's well that ends well, no, it just ends, you're done. And I guess I'll leave you with that. You can follow me on Twitter. I often put a lot of writing stuff, and I get a publicly accessible Facebook wall. You don't even have to be my friend. Go there, look at it if you want, but if you want to join, whatever, then you can get a feed on that. But I put a lot of writing tips on there. Well, you're in the midst of it, and I'm it's been a long time. I think I probably finished my dissertation before some of the people in the room were born. I'd be interested to any thoughts that come out of your recent experience.
Does anyone care to respond?
Oh, come on, we got 2 mics.
Very good presentation, thank you, and it really resonates. I think I'm a binge writer, as you would describe it, and but it also has some, with each technique come different are different tricks to increase the number of words you can put on paper. For me, something that is you would play music, and you use the same music every time to start your writing. So you trigger yourself on certain things. You just open the Word document and start your music, and after a while, the word starts flowing out. But I think it's a really good tip, the 200 words a day. I'll try it. Thank you.
The music thing. A lot of people really benefit from having music. Hopefully you're not paired with a partner who doesn't benefit from having music. I mean, it's often individual differences. I remember when I was doing therapy for writer's block, there's this one guy that would get incredibly blocked and angry and very upset. And he'd smash things and break things. So I got him to steal the podium, the little thing you put like on a table from class, and put a little towel over it so it looked like it was religious, and have 2 candles. And he would, every morning, he'd have to get his little altar set up before he wrote. And it was amazing that once he got into a ritual, we said, well, eventually you need to get that back. And but it got him going. And I'm surprised how many writers naturally hit on rituals they have to do. Arthur Miller had to have the pencils sharpened a certain way and arranged up in front of the pad. And everybody has their ritual, but some of it is, I think what's going on behaviorally is you've established a set of cues that elicit writing. And it makes a lot of sense. So that the cues elicit the writing, and then it's rewarding. Now, sometimes when you write and you get writer's block, you need a different set of cues. And so what's happened, if everything is familiar, so is the stuckness. So you got to grab your iPad or whatever and flee to a coffee shop that's different than the setting in which you've been writing. And you'd be surprised it comes back to you. And I've been spending a lot of time, and I've looked into actually B.F. Skinner. Some people may know the famous behavioralist. He had a self-control theory. It was entirely based on environmental control of writing. And he kept a cumulative record of everything he wrote every day and keep the graph going. So like his pigeons would have pecks, we'd have words. And he wrote some pretty brilliant stuff about environmental control of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, thank you for your talk. Some very useful advice. About the writing process and partners, what I hear is mostly like, for us, there's only the dissertation and the partners just have to deal with that. I wish they were here. They could maybe learn something. But on the other hand, I found that in my first year it was like that for me. It's like massive stress and continuous urge to keep going because I felt like I wasn't getting done fast enough. But once I just consciously made the decision, okay, I need time for myself, I need to make time for my partner, and took the liberty to do that, that made me, in the time that I was working, twice as productive, or maybe 3 times as productive. So there's a bit of two sides to the story, I think.
I totally agree, and I think some of it's trusting yourself that you need the time, you make good use of it, and some of it is the partner picking up on that they trust you because you trust yourself. So it's not that you're going to disappear into the dark hole of the dissertation and never emerge again, or emerge a totally different person, but they just need to trust the process. And I find sometimes the partners, though, need a little bit of work, where it's not abandoning you if they go out to a movie and catch a beer with some friends and don't take you along. You much prefer that they did that. And it's restorative of them, just as it may be restorative of you to have them out of the house for a while. And so you don't have to work on the dissertation, you don't have to be in the house with them. And I think sometimes establishing those healthy boundaries, it takes a while, though. And I think sometimes the problem is people care too much for each other, and it gets in the way, but they start overriding the other person's autonomy and letting them be.
Just one last comment. I agree with what you're saying. It's like you have to both just take care of yourself first before the other.
Absolutely.
And that's basically to sum up what you're saying, I think.
I have a loud voice. Okay, so after you said that one important trick to not fall into stress during your dissertation writing is to detach yourself, and I think that's really good. But then also you talked about the cultural differences between Holland and America, and since I'm not both, and I was wondering, then I guess that the Dutch culture is pretty good because they consider their PhD as a job, and they detach much easier, right? Do you think that's okay?
I think if they could really do that, I watched some dissertation students with a planned vacation. You know, the Dutch are very orderly. So often I find I can say to a Dutch person, where are you going on vacation in December? If they're good, so you're going on vacation in December? Yeah, where are you going? And if you ask an American, well, I don't know. You know, they don't plan like that. And I find there's often a rhythm, and it can be debilitating when it's extreme, where the Dutch people work up, they structure their life around their vacations and getting papers out the door before their vacation. And that can be really stressful because it's an artificial goal. And if they can do that and be motivated by that, fine. But it can be debilitating. Oh my God, I've wasted a whole day and it's a day closer to my vacation. And I think it can be, if it's flexible goal and you pursue it and you can fail to meet it, but if it becomes a rigid goal, it can be a source of stress. One thing I find writing with Dutch people is you've got to be careful about Dutch vacation messages on email. So I work for a lot of open access journals, and you submit a paper, and then often it comes right back to you because, like, I'm a close one academic editor, and we'll send it right back because it's not in the right format, or you didn't answer a question about conflict of interest or duplicate publications or whatever. And so the editor will send you an email back to the author, and they'll get this obnoxious message. I'm away for 3 weeks in Spain. And, well, number one, the Post editors don't go to Spain, and they don't want to think that you did. And then they don't care that you went to Spain, now, except for that you brought it up. All they want is you to answer their questions so they can process your manuscript. And so I often coach, okay, go on vacation to Spain or wherever. Actually, go to Spain, because they have internet and you can work at the campsites up in the mountains. But no, but don't leave a message like that. Instead, leave an email message. I'm going to be intermittently available. All of my co-authors have Word files of the manuscript, and here are their emails. And here's my cell phone. The Dutch person will say, I don't want the editor of Post One to call me on vacation. Trust me, he doesn't want to call you when you're off on vacation unless it's a real emergency, and it's probably worth receiving the call. There won't be many of them, but sometimes it can really hold things up. You know, with publishing now, you know, things can, you submit a paper, and if there aren't revisions requested, it could be out in a couple weeks, and you don't want to interfere with that process. But you do want your vacations. So I guess, yeah, the vacation mentality I've learned to take vacations. I'm not good at it, but I do more than I used to. And I actually don't write sometimes for days, a short number of days. But I think it shouldn't become a stressor in the sense of an external goal that frustrates you and inhibits you. Yeah.
Someone else.
Do you have any suggestions for stress relief when you're not writing? I mean, we don't write all the time. We have to do measurements and many other things. And when you're in the process of that, what are your suggestions for stress relief?
I think a lot of off-task behavior. I took up the banjo when I was working on my dissertation, but that's an awful instrument. And I found it for hours. I could practice and the sounds were still painful. And it was a real achievement when I was really proud of my banjo when I just gave it to a neighbor because it got out of my life. What was bad for me is that I thought I would go do something else and I'd feel good. And I couldn't get improved enough to feel good. It would still sound the same. But if you can find something that is independent of your work and a source of satisfaction, I personally think, and I've learned a lot about the Dutch family life since I've been coming back and forth. I think with more advanced academics, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, I think the Dutch are much better at having an alternative set of rewards to what their career provides. Sometimes things are just shitty at the lab or you've gotten rejected paper. And it's nice to go home and have a dog with a wagging tail and a friendly family who doesn't really care about your H factor or your citations for the week. And I think that Americans sometimes get overly specialized. I remember in anger saying to a senior person I was working, I said, "Damn it, Rich, back then we used to get reprint request cards. People used to send a postcard to you, now they do an email. But I said, someday you're at risk you'll drop dead and they'll surround your casket with all your reprint request cards and nobody else will come because he was so focused on the work. And I think Americans do that sometimes. I think the Dutch at least have the cultural option not to let that happen. And I think it's good if you have rewards, achievable rewards that aren't related to your work. It allows you to stay passionate about your work.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I was wondering, do you have some views on writing in two different languages? So for example, sometimes I write down some ideas in Dutch and at a certain point I start making those into English sentences. But as you mentioned, well, there were quite some differences. So do you have some views on when to switch, you could say, to English or to leave Dutch out of the...
That's a profound question. It deserves a thoughtful answer. I know that the writer Joseph Conrad, Polish was his native language, and he wrote with difficulty in English. And the process of getting it from Polish to English really made him a great writer. I think, off the top of my head, write in whatever language you're comfortable and revise after. And I think it's a mistake for people to try to force themselves to think in English. But on the other hand, once you've got after 5 drafts, you want to not to convey an awareness that it was written by someone who's Dutch. And there's certain Dutch things that show up in writing. They always say, it would be interesting to. Rather than defining a research question, they say it would be interesting to. Or it would be important. Well, don't tell me it's important. Tell me something that says that I say it's important. You know what I mean? And there's certain things that people do who are native Dutch writers when they go into English. Germans put their verbs at the end. When they had the Nuremberg trials after World War II, the Americans tried to have simultaneous translation, where they have these expert speakers, and they would translate as the words were spoken in German. It was a disaster. You can't do that. Even an expert person, you need to get it out and then revise. Does that make sense? Because the American person trying to translate the German didn't have the verbs, so didn't know how to to simultaneously say what was being said. They had to catch the verb. And I think that write in Dutch if you need to, and then go back. And you gradually find that you no longer need to do that. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
But what you don't want to do is put any struggle at all that doesn't have to be there. If it comes naturally in Dutch, do it in Dutch. You can catch it later. The basic principle I teach again and again is I can't teach people to write well. I can teach them to rewrite well.